Somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, a family loses their barn to fire, and within weeks, a quiet chain of events begins that most outsiders will never fully understand. Neighbors visit, measurements are taken by hand, and timber is selected, shaped, and stacked across multiple farms over the following months. No contractor is hired, no permit meeting is scheduled, and no digital tool tracks the growing pile of pre-cut beams waiting in those barns. On one chosen morning, hundreds of people will arrive and raise a complete structure. But the question worth asking is exactly how the preparation made that possible. The answer isn't speed, and it isn't strength. It's a social system so deeply rehearsed that it runs without a single instruction being given. Every person who shows up already knows their role before their boots hit the frozen ground. Think about what that actually means. No orientation, no crew list, no foreman with a clipboard assigning tasks at the gate. The community doesn't coordinate on the morning of the raising because the coordination happened long before anyone drove a nail. What looks like a miracle of one day is actually the final visible hour of something that began the moment that barn caught fire. The barn doesn't rise in a day. It rises in the day that follows months of work nobody films. Long before the first wagon rolls in, the community's master carpenters have already walked the land, assessed the soil, and agreed on every dimension of the structure. The timber has been felled, hauled, and left to season through an entire winter so it won't warp under load. Every beam has been measured, notched, and numbered by hand, so each piece fits exactly one place in the frame. The mortise and tenon joints, the interlocking cuts that hold the whole structure without a single nail, are already finished before construction day begins. Experienced framers have mentally assigned every crew its position, every task its sequence, every worker their role. When 300 people arrive at sunrise, they aren't figuring out what to do. They already know. The chaos you might expect simply never materializes because the decisions were made weeks ago in quiet workshops and evening conversations. What looks like spontaneous coordination is actually a rehearsed performance with no rehearsal date, only a lifetime of shared understanding. Every man who shows up to a barn raising has already been to dozens of them, starting when he was small enough to hand nails to his father. That first role, running tools and watching joints get cut, isn't busy work. It's the beginning of a decades-long apprenticeship with no classroom and no certificate. By the time a boy is 12, he can read a timber frame the way other kids read a page, because the structure itself has been his textbook since he could walk. Teenage boys don't observe from the edge anymore. They're in the frame, cutting mortises, fitting tenons, learning by consequence when a joint is wrong. The older men around them don't stop to explain. They demonstrate, correct once, and move on, because that's how they were taught. A man in his 30s arrives already knowing which problems belong to him, which crew he fits, and which elder to defer to without a word exchanged. That knowledge isn't written anywhere, and no foreman assigned it. It lives in the hands and the memory of every person on the site. So when 300 people spread across a field at dawn, they aren't waiting to be told where to go. They already know. Before the sun clears the tree line, the lane is already full of horses. Wagons roll in carrying timber mallets, draw knives, and families who've done this before, many times before. Nobody checks in with a foreman because there is no foreman to check in with. What you're watching isn't organized chaos. It's something far more precise than that. Each person who steps off a wagon already knows their role because that role was decided long before today. The older men move toward the foundation without being told, reading the site the way you'd read a familiar road. Women set up the food stations at the field's edge with the same quiet authority, because feeding 300 people on a schedule is its own form of engineering. Younger men cluster near the timber piles, sorted by what they've already proven they can do. Children carry water, fetch tools, and watch, absorbing the choreography they'll one day lead. No clipboard exists here because the clipboard is every shared meal, every past raising, every winter spent in someone else's workshop learning the work. The question isn't how they know where to go, it's how the timber itself is about to leave the ground. The most dangerous moment of any barn raising happens before a single board is nailed to the frame. Each timber bent, a complete wall section mortised and pegged flat on the ground, can weigh close to 2,000 pounds, and it has to rise from horizontal to perfectly vertical, using nothing but ropes and human muscle. Crews of men grip the pike poles, long wooden shafts tipped with iron, and drive them against the rising frame to push it upward degree by degree. Other men haul on ropes looped over temporary posts, leaning their full body weight back into the pull, boots digging into the dirt for traction. The bent climbs slowly at first, then faster as gravity shifts and the angle steepens, and that transition is where things can go wrong. If a rope slips or a crew loses its footing, several tons of timber swings back toward the men below. There is no foreman shouting orders through a radio. There is one experienced voice calling the count, and every man on that frame knows his job before the lift begins. That knowledge did not come from a safety briefing that morning. It came from watching this exact sequence since childhood. Once the bent locks into its sill and the braces are driven home, the crew does not pause. The next bent is already waiting on the ground, and the question now is how all these standing frames become a single roof. The moment the first bent frame locks upright, the crowd stops being a crowd and becomes something else entirely. Framers are already mortising the next section, while roofers climb the purlins with bundles of shingles on their backs. Siders work the long walls from the ground up, fitting boards in a rhythm that looks almost choreographed from a distance. Joiners move between teams like a circulatory system, delivering cut lumber exactly where the next hand is already reaching for it. Nobody announces these assignments. Every person arrived knowing their role because they have filled it before, at someone else's barn, in another season. The building doesn't rise floor by floor, wall by wall, the way a modern crew would sequence it. It rises everywhere at once, dozens of tasks converging on the same structure from every angle. That is the difference between a workforce and a community. One follows a schedule, the other carries the schedule inside them. What keeps 300 people moving at that pace for 10 straight hours isn't adrenaline. It's something waiting in the field that holds the whole day together. Somewhere around midday, the hammers stop and 300 people sit down together in a field. The women have been working just as hard as the men, cooking since before dawn, feeding a small army from folding tables and cast iron pots. Nobody invoiced anyone for this meal, and nobody will. That detail matters more than it sounds because this entire day runs on a currency that has no denomination. Obligation freely given, returned without keeping score. The Amish call this Gelassenheit, a yielding of the self to the community, and a barn raising is one of its most visible expressions. When your farm burns, your neighbors don't debate whether to come. They simply appear because you appeared for them, and someone will appear for them in turn. It isn't charity and it isn't transaction. It's a covenant, renewed every time a new frame rises against the sky. And when the meal ends and the hammers start again, what's being built isn't just a barn. It's the proof that this covenant still holds. By the time the last beam is pegged and the shadows stretch long across the field, a structure that didn't exist this morning stands complete against the evening sky. No project manager signed off on it, no scheduling software tracked the critical path, and no consultant built a single hour to make it happen. What raised this barn was something older and more reliable than any of those things. It was the accumulated trust of people who have practiced showing up for each other across entire generations. Every nail driven today was also a promise kept, a debt honored, and a lesson passed down to the child watching from the fence rail. The Amish don't call this technology, but that is exactly what it is. Preparation, skill, and shared obligation engineered into the bones of a community. The barn will stand for 100 years, and so will the system that built it.